But I ended up putting at number 5 on my list George W. Bush.
Okay, let's go.
Well, George W. Bush, I wasn't going to put him in number 5. Originally, I thought of him like bottom 10, but not necessarily bottom 5. But then I really started thinking about it. I mean, obviously, I was around as a teenager during the Bush administration. I'm sure you're a little older than me, so you probably have a very vivid memory of the disaster of his time in office. And I started really thinking about like the lasting effects of stuff like No Child Left Behind, the Iraq War, the absolute abysmal response to Hurricane Katrina, how so much of his policies led to the Great Recession. And then I just started thinking, like, other than like the fact that he was somewhat funny, at some times, there really wasn't any redeeming qualities to his actual administration. Like just none whatsoever. I mean, cut taxes for the middle class, but that included tax cuts for the rich, which they always do, right? They can never just cut taxes for the middle class. You never just focus on us. Just always have to be tax cuts for the rich as well. And I just couldn't really find hardly any redeeming qualities of his administration. And I feel like so much of that is we're still living in the damage of the Bush administration to such a great extent. So I just couldn't, as much as I think he's kind of he's a nice-ish kind of guy, like from a personable standpoint, still a war criminal. So you have to put that out there. So how nice can a war criminal be? But I just couldn't let him get away with it. I even though there's been a little bit of a rehabilitation of his reputation because it's gotten so much worse for the Republican Party with someone like Trump. And he was a funny guy and somewhat of a friendly guy, but I just, as far as like his administration goes, I couldn't get out of my mind all of the blunders, all of the mistakes, and so I had to put him in number 5.
Listen, I think that's an excellent pick and one I wasn't expecting, but it is a great pick. I gotta say that. But so here's the thing with George W. Bush is that the worst part about Trump's presidency is the fact that it's kind of made people forget about how bad George W. Bush was. Like that, because I mean, this might contradict your list, I don't know, but I will defend to my dying day that Bush was a worse president than Trump. Like maybe that's not your list, I don't know, don't tell me, but I always say because look at this, as bad as Trump is, and like he's terrible and all that, Trump did not start a war that killed 1 million people unnecessarily. That didn't happen. I mean, it didn't, and people just forget about that. And Bush was able to hide behind, like you said, his like folksy demeanor. It's like, oh shucks, I'm just one of the good old boys here and everything. And how he got away with that, I don't know. I don't know how he got off, pulling that. Because where was he from? He's from like Connecticut or something. Yeah, right. From like Connecticut or some shit. And it's like, he literally like bought a ranch in Texas to like pretend to be a cowboy and everything. And people just roll with it. And the thing. And you mentioned like how he seems like a decent guy and everything, and I think that does play off on it, and also that he just seemed like everyone blamed Dick Cheney. Everyone was like, well, Dick Cheney, and of course I'm not absolving Dick Cheney or anything like this, but I don't think people could bring themselves to actually believe that this bumbling fucking moron was as evil as he actually was. I mean, we see him on stage saying something like, they say fool me once, then shame on. You say you get fooled, you can't get fooled again. I mean, he can't finish like a normal shit, expression like that. So yeah, it is. Oh, and then now I gotta see like videos of him handing candy to Michelle Obama. I was like, oh, what a great man, what a good human being. And oh, look, he paints. It's like, yeah, there's not a good precedent there for painters. Okay, there's a lot of people who painted who did a lot of horrible shit. That doesn't absolve you from anything. But I think that's fair. What do you think of that like how his image has like no one has to be happier about Trump than George W. Bush. No one's got to be happier if you ask me.
Oh yeah, no. No one has to be happy. I think one of the most interesting quotes post presidency for George W. Bush is they asked him. He was at the inauguration for Trump, and he had some type of mishap. He was trying to put like a poncho on or something, and he couldn't get it on. So there's all these photos of him looking as ridiculous as he always has. Yeah. And they asked him, what did you think about the Trump inauguration? And I think his quote was something like, "That was some weird shit." And like when he said that, it's like, damn, I gotta agree with George W. Bush. That really was some weird shit. You're really right, and I think that was the beginning. That was the beginning of the rehabilitation. We started looking at Bush with this different lens of like, well, damn, he may have started in a legal war that killed millions of civilians, but he didn't, at least he's not as bad as Trump. At least he's not this, this asshole, And I think that's what it is. It's really the personality that obscures us from all of the terrible things that Bush and his administration were directly responsible for. I mean, even recently, he was giving a speech about, I can't remember if it was some type of, illegal invasion or something, and he misspoke and said Iraq instead of the country he was supposed to say. I think it was about Ukraine. Maybe about Ukraine.
It was about Ukraine. Yep.
Yeah, and he's like, when they illegally invaded Iraq, and then he kind of like, I meant Ukraine. He's like, well, Iraq too. Like, he even just like casually admits that was a terrible mistake and everything, but whatever. Nobody's really thinking about that anymore. And so, I just think like he was able to use charisma and personality to really obscure just terrible policymaking, terrible administrative skills, and just a really, probably one of the most, terrible foreign policy, performances that we've ever seen in the entire history of this country. And so, I really do think it's all about the personality that he was able to use to kind of pull the wool over our eyes. That's just really how terrible he was. And a lot of people just, they don't remember how bad it really was.
They beg for him they beg to have him back. Like, I'd love a Republican like Bush again. Like, what? And you mentioned the foreign policy thing. Like, what I always talk about the foreign policy thing is that Bush found this way to combine his like weird religious extremism and neoconservatism. Like, that doesn't really exist anymore. They've kind of dropped the neoconservatism and everything. And like, if you guys remember, he went to Jacques Chirac, the president of France at the time, and Chirac wasn't convinced about this whole Iraq war thing. And Bush said, we need to go there because the demons of Gog and Magog are on the move in the Middle East. And Chirac's like, this is a fucking insane person. And he was. It's just like, that was our president. And the last thing about it is that I hate that what you said is completely true, that people put so much stock into vibes and, how people feel. Like, it's like when they always like when Bush ran against Kerry, I remember everyone was asking, well, who would you rather have a beer with? And that's who you're going to vote for. And I've always remembered that because it's true. Because, Kerry was definitely better with policy, but even I would choose to have a beer with Bush than Kerry. It's like, and people just roll with that. And it's kind of sad, but people vote on vibes and not policy, but that's just kind of the way it is. So, all right, my number 5. Now, for my number 5, I got a little cute with my number 5. I have to admit, this is the only time I'm going to get cute with this or whatever, but it's not going to be like a theme or whatever. But my number 5, I kind of have to go with President Camacho from Idiocracy. So, I mean, President Camacho, this is the funny thing about Camacho is that he's kind of like a more insane Donald Trump, but with a good heart. I mean, like, the guy was clearly not a good president. I mean, he was dumb as hell, and his policy for like agriculture left a lot to be desired. The plants do not crave Gatorade and all that. No. But as you say, he did have an eye for talent. Like, he found like a smart individual and said, okay, I'm going to put this guy as my vice president, trying to get this shit rolling here. And, a little violent, a little over the top. And I think that if I was going to draw, there's no real parallel here. But, not great at his job, but he did care. Kind of like Jimmy Carter is what I would say. Like, Jimmy Carter, I wouldn't say was a good president, but the man did kind of care, about the country, even though he kind of steered us in the wrong direction in a lot of ways. But yeah, number 5 is a President Camacho. I love this guy.
If I knew we were doing fictional presidents, then my list would be. I would probably.
Well, I'm just being cute. I'm just getting cute with this one. I just thought it was funny to throw on there, so no. But
it's funny. I actually saw Idiocracy for the first time a couple years ago because so many people kept telling me like this is like so similar to what we got going on, and then I saw Idiocracy and I did think it was definitely like just kind of scary how accurate they were as far as just like how bad it would get. But yeah, my only problem with that movie is that like it's really stupid, and I get that that's like the point. Like I get that's the point of the whole thing. But the filmmaker in me, the writer in me, is like they really relied on the fact that the society in the future was going to be so stupid that they could just make the script itself, especially the third act, quite stupid because it's a stupid society. So we can rely on that as when people say this movie is stupid, it's gonna be like, yeah, that's the point. And like they don't have to they can justify it like that. So that's my only issue with that movie. But it's actually like it is a really good satire, and it's very indicative of what could happen to society if we just completely disregard education and knowledge and just allow our worst, urges to take over. So it is a funny movie, and again, it's one of those things that kind of flew under the radar. Not a lot of people paid attention to it when it came out, but now it's kind of like, oh shit, we're actually in some version of that.
When did you see it?
I actually saw this like 2021, like very recently.
Oh, wow.
3 years
Okay.
ago.
Yeah. So, yeah, because it's an old movie. I feel like it's like 20 years old.
I think. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, yeah, it's like, so I saw Idiocracy. It was late. It wasn't like 06. It was probably like 2010, 2011, somewhere around there. Yeah. And I'd heard a lot about it. And when I watched it, so my problem with Idiocracy is that it's like a eugenicist film.
In a lot of ways. Oh my God. I was going to say that. But I didn't want to get to the whole thing. But it's 100% eugenics. So.
It's eugenicist. I mean, it's funny, but it's still eugenics. Let's be real here, because I remember back in those days. So my cousins never won't watch this, hopefully, anyway. But I have a lot of cousins who are just not doing well in life. They never were, a lot of them are in jail or dead or have, 9 kids by 5 different women and stuff. And so when I was a teenager, I was noticing this trend, and I was like, oh, okay, wow, these guys are going way off course here. Yeah. And I grew up, and I was like, I started noticing very familiar patterns here, that the dumbest people I knew all had like a dozen kids. And the smartest people I knew had between like 0 and 4 kids or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh no, that means that the dumb people are going to outpopulate. And that's how I thought as a kid. And then I saw Idiocracy, and I was like, oh, this is what I thought as a child. But there's a reason I don't think that anymore, because it's a lot more complex than this, than the dumb genes, populating the earth here. So that is my problem with Idiocracy, that it is kind of funny. And you're right. It is kind of like a lazy excuse. Like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Well, nothing here makes sense. Like, okay, that doesn't mean that doesn't make it clever or anything like that. But it is a fun watch. I have to admit, it's been a while, but it is kind of stupid in a lot of ways.
It is, yeah. But it's some weird racial stuff going on in Idiocracy, and also too, just to close the cap on that conversation, I do think that this idea that only smart people can make smart kids is kind of like Elon Musk's whole theory right now. And he himself isn't even that smart. And so I think and it's weird. You think of like most Nobel Prize winners, their children don't end up winning Nobel Prizes on average, and their parents didn't win Nobel Prize on average. So I think that genetics does play a small role in that. Of course, but I think environment is a big part of that, and obviously, a lot of times you'll see like a Frasier type situation where like a working class guy has these like brilliant children or something like that. That happens, pretty often. So I don't think you can necessarily say that the education level of the parent is going to 100% determine the level of the child. I mean, there's a lot of different factors in there, and I think that movie, obviously, being that it was just kind of a silly movie, doesn't really put a lot of those factors into consideration. But it is an interesting watch. I do suggest people like watch it at least once just to kind of get the gist of it, because it does, point out some things that we do need to be worried about as a society. But it obviously does go into some arenas that I was like, it's
little uncomfortable. Little uncomfortable. If you think about it for more than 5 seconds, it gets uncomfortable. Well, what you mentioned with the intelligence thing, one thing that's always bothered me is just how we define not just